And you're
Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Jim, for setting up the Zoom. This session is being recorded and will appear on the JGS of Southwest Florida website, along with a handout that Debbie Long has provided for us. Now, everybody is muted. However, if you have a question, you can post it in the chat or raise your hand, and I'm sure Debbie will call on you at the appropriate time. And I just wanted to let you know, but I don't think I have to let you know, that genealogy is always filled with unexpected connections. One of those unexpected connections was between Debbie Long and myself. We actually graduated high school together from Niles East in Skokie, Illinois. And because of our interest in Jewish genealogy, we've reconnected recently. So that's always fun. Now, the JGS of Southwest Florida is in the process of updating the surnames and places list that our members are researching. And as of today, here are the JGS of Southwest Florida statistics as to which country the majority of our ancestors come from. Our membership has more ancestors from the Ukraine than any other country, followed by Poland, then Lithuania, then Belarus, and then Germany. In addition, the JGS of Southwest Florida has a list of the surnames and towns that our members are researching. And if you want to be added to this list, you must be a member. Dues are $25 for a single, $30 for a family, and $50 for a sustaining member. And Liz Klaber, our treasurer, is on the call now, and she's always happy to take your money. I would like to tell you about 3 upcoming virtual genealogy conferences. You must register and there is a fee, but I've heard that all 3 of these are very well worth attending. There's the National Genealogical Society 2021 live conference taking place May 17th through May 21st. There's the New England Regional Genealogy Consortium. That's taking place from April 1st through May 31st. And then I've also heard that the Ohio Genealogical Society, which is the largest state genealogical society in the United States, has their conference from April 14th through April 17th. And if I talk too fast, we do have a newsletter coming up that will have the websites for all of these conferences listed so that you can register. And now I would like to call on Howard Finkel, our program chair, to introduce our speaker and tell us about our program for next month.
Thank you, Kim, and welcome everyone. We have one more program left this year, and that is on April the 18th. Our speaker will be Donna Moody, a local genealogist, and Donna is going to talk about getting the most out of Ancestry.com. So those of you that are using Ancestry or would like to know more about it should be with us on April the 18th, same time as today. With regard to today's program, Deborah Long is founder of the Triangle Jewish Genealogical Society in the Durham Chapel Hill Triangle area in North Carolina. The daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, Deborah Long reviews in this presentation the best as well as some of the obscure resources and methods for determining the fate of those involved in the Holocaust, including survivors and victims. She will use examples from her own research to demonstrate the documents and artifacts she discovered. Deborah has been researching her family's Holocaust history and looking for surviving family members for more than 50 years. Her research in 2009 led to the discovery of surviving cousins in Sweden, Hungary, Canada, and most recently in Israel. Deborah is a professional educator. She has written more than 20 books, including a memoir about growing up as a child of survivors titled First Hitler, Then Your Father, and Now You. Deborah, thank you for coming, and you're on.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And as Kim pointed out, there are any number of connections here. I have some friends from high school who are in the audience, as well as a more recent friend from Wilmette. I find it ironic that I grew up in a town where 1 in 6 families had at least one person who had been in the Holocaust. And I didn't know that growing up. I felt very isolated in Skokie. I lived in a very sad household. And had I known that there were more young people like me, I think I would have reached out and made those connections and tried to understand why my family was different. So I come to this a little bit late, come to Skokie, a town that became famous because the neo-Nazis wanted to march through it, almost did in the 1970s. And that's when I began to realize how important my hometown was to me. As we sometimes say, geography is destiny. Where you are born, where you grow up has a lot to do with who you become. I wanted to also thank your JGS for making a gift in my mother's name to the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, which was built in Skokie as a 20-year project after the neo-Nazis decided that they wanted to march through our little town in order to make a point. Also, a note about the title of my program. I always struggle with the word lost in the context of finding your family lost in the Holocaust. I could certainly use stronger words. I could say finding your family murdered or exterminated in the Holocaust. I could say finding your family who perished in the Holocaust. And when I talk to audiences that may be a little bit less friendly to me, I do use that stronger language because I think you and I know that we're talking about family members whose fate is unknown, largely because they were exterminated. As a matter of fact, let me ask you all to respond to this question. How many of you have family members who, as far as you know, perished in the Shoah? Would you please raise your hands? And Kim, if you would kind of give me a little head count here of the people who are here. It looks to me like many of them are responding positively. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
Okay, so my guess is thank you very much. That is why you're here. You want to find out what happened to those family members. For those of you not familiar with the word Shoah, it is a Hebrew word that means catastrophe. It's one of the many words that is used and I think should be specifically used to denote the destruction of European Jewry during World War II. I'm often asked by my friends, particularly my non-Jewish friends, why am I so obsessed with my family's history? Part of it was because up until 10 years ago, I didn't know my family's history. My parents spoke rarely, like many Holocaust about the Holocaust. And by the time I started to get some answers from my parents, they had forgotten a lot of details about their grandparents' names and going further back. But I think the best answer I've ever read about why people remember the Holocaust came from actually a very well-known Jewish genealogist by the name of Arthur Kurzweil. He wrote in his book, From Generations to Generations, the Talmud says that when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, then the Jews did their family trees. Sometimes if you want to go forward, you first have to go backward. You see where you are coming from, you know where you are going. Most people in the world do not know quite what to do with the Holocaust, but I think we genealogists have found out what to do. We remember names. When the Nazis rounded us up, they took away our names and they gave us numbers. What we are involved with doing is taking away their numbers and giving them back their names. And so with that as an introduction, let's take a look at the resources that we can use so that we can remember their names. As I used to tell my mother, what was all of this suffering for if we don't remember what happened? One of the challenges I found in professing my interest in genealogy and finding my family history was I was actually discouraged not only by my mother in particular, but all of my mother's friends. When I grew up in Skokie, I had an uncle Arnie, I had an aunt Esther, but they weren't really my aunts they weren't really my uncles, and their children weren't my cousins. So they became my extended families. I didn't have any uncles or aunts or grandparents or cousins. But what I heard from them, again, was quite discouraging. What my family would say to me, you don't want to go back to Europe. Everything was destroyed during the Shoah. Europe is just one big cemetery. I faced a lot of resistance in trying to even think about going to places like Poland and Hungary, where my mother and father were from, or God forbid, going to Germany. But by the same token, I also heard that the Nazis kept very good records. So both statements can't be true. And in fact, while I absolutely understand the reticence of many Jewish people to go back to Europe or to dig around in their family tree, the Nazis did keep very good records, and now we can find out about the fate of our families. So let me suggest that the two first most important steps are that you submit an inquiry to the International Tracing Service, now known as Arrelson Archives, as well as to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. And I suggest that they are first because it's going to take several months before you hear back. And while you are waiting to hear back, the research at those two repositories can begin. Let's start with ITS, again, the International Tracing Service, now known as the Arrelson Archives. The Arrelson Archives are located in a small town in Germany called Bad Arolsen. In this repository, there are 30 million original documents and 50 million reference cards. And thankfully, some of this information is now online. So when you apply for assistance, you can, in the meantime, be looking at these online documents where you will find records of displaced persons from the International Refugee Organization. And yes, some of them do have pictures. There are concentration camp records, ghetto records, Nazi penal institutions. Some of the documents are from Dachau and Buchenwald in particular, and there are also transport lists and prison lists from various camps. The ITS also has its own case files. For example, when my mother came to the United States in 1946, she left a trail of breadcrumbs. She had married, so her name was different. She didn't know if any of her 6 brothers and sisters had survived. She couldn't find them. So she would write to the ITS, and they kept the records of her writing and looking for other information. There are also child tracing files. And again, some of these documents are now online, and you can find them not only at the ITS website, but also through Ancestry and Yad Vashem. More about that in just a moment. We have some partnerships that are going on that are making these online records even more accessible. Right now, there are 13 million documents that represent more than 2 million people persecuted by the Nazis, and this is just the first of several large collections to go online. Now, you can search the documents by name, but don't get discouraged. When you're doing this by yourself, remember, not all of the records are yet online, which is why, as we all know as genealogists, we have to keep going back to the eternal spring, right? We keep going back to Jewish Gen, we keep going back to Ancestry, MyHeritage, because we never know what new documents we're going to find online. So to go to the online archive, and as Kim mentioned, I did give you a list of all the resources mentioned, so you don't have to take notes. What you want to do is go to this website address and make sure when you do find that there are documents that you also download the e-guide, because if you don't have the guide to the files, you won't understand what you're looking at. So, and again, remember, don't be disappointed if you don't find anything, because it could very well be that the records are not yet online. So what you're going to do is send both an inquiry to Arrelson as well as to do some searching online. And let me go ahead and stop screen sharing for just a moment and take you to the internet so that I can show you. Let me go ahead and stop that. And let's go and take a look at what a search at the Arrelson Archives would look like. Here we go. Looks like I just accidentally Yes, here we go. All right, can you see a page that has the last name of Dobrzinski on it in front of you? Okay, this is an example, if you did your own online search of a name, what you might find. And underneath each of these names, Dobrzinska, you see a series of numbers which identifies the item, and you can click on this. It is a hot link, and then the document will come online. But again, you might not be able to understand it without the e-guide. So here's an example of what looks like a folder from the International Tracing Service, and you can already start to find some wonderful genealogical information, such as locations and birth dates. So that's just a very, very quick example. Let me go back to my slides. I'm sure that some of you are doing what I would do, which is to follow me along underneath the Zoom screen doing your own research. Let me share with you just a very short video of where you can find these documents. I'm a big believer in going straight to the source, so I go to ITS, but some of you have an account with Ancestry, and Ancestry is linking this information as well. Let me share a short video with you, and let me make sure that the sound is working properly.
For many people who disappeared and were killed by the Nazis, there is nothing. There is no grave, there is absolutely no inscription whatsoever, except for a line, birth date sometimes, and a name. These documents, it's a testimony, it's a witness to what happened. The Arson Archives hold 30 million documents. It's the largest worldwide archive on the persecution by the Nazis and on the survivors after the war. We had the intention to publish large collections online, and we didn't have the resources. So we were very privileged to find an excellent partner with Ancestry.
The partnership essentially involves the archives digitizing the millions of paper documents that they have, and Ancestry creating searchable indexes, and people everywhere can search the records for free.
7.5 years ago, I found a list from Auschwitz with my mother's signature on it. It was a list of 227 names that came from the Arlson Archive in Germany. What you can see at the front is Auschwitz, November 29th, 1944. It's a list of women prisoners. This is my mother's name. This is the number that was on her arm. This is her signature. And what's most compelling to me are the signatures, each different, each representing their personality. What I've been doing since then is going through name by name, trying to determine what happened to these girls, what's their story, where'd they come from, did they survive? I felt compelled to go to Arlson to see if I could learn anything more, both about girls on the list as well as family members. This was a girl, 15 years old. As I was growing up, my mother told me if I would have an extra piece of bread, I would give it to Margitka. And
Okay, and you're, of course, will have a link to this video as well as if you want to watch the entire thing. This gentleman also gets similarly obsessed to the point that he actually goes to the archives. And I wanted you to have a visual illustration of what the inside of the archives look like and what it looks like on the outside. Clearly, it's a somewhat of a nondescript building, but should you go there once the pandemic lifts, you'll want to make sure that you have an appointment. You just don't show up at the doorstep and expect that everybody is going to drop what they're doing to find your documents. So while you're doing this online search, what I would suggest that you do first is actually submit a research request in writing. It is very, very easy to do. And what I would suggest also is that if you've done this before, and probably some of you have, do it again. I have on my calendar every 3 years that I submit another request to Arlson as well as to the Holocaust Museum, because you never know what new documents are going to be found in somebody's basement, behind somebody's wall. It does take about 3 months on average for you to get a response from Arlson, which is why you want to do that first. And they do receive more than 1,000 inquiries every month. It doesn't cost a dime. So go ahead and get online to the website. I'll show you how simple it is. There's the link again. It's going to be provided to you on the handout. Let me go ahead and go to that link. Okay. And do you see a screen that says submit your inquiry? Can you see that yet? You can, great. Okay, so you just come down here to that page, you indicate what you're looking for, you choose one of the best, you submit it. It will ask you who you're looking for. It may ask you for what other details you might have about that person, and is pretty much a very simple form. So send that in, do not wait. The Holocaust survivors are dying off, and if you have one in your family, obviously you want to get as much information as you can, because many of them don't know how they were caught up in the river of history. So get as much information from them as you can. Just recently, at the end of last year, the Arlson Archives added another 1 million documents to what is available online, including pictures of prisoners and transport lists. I always look at the pictures to see if I can find any image of my mother or what her family members might have looked like. There are also letters written by Soviet forced laborers. I didn't know this until I started to dig in deep about 10 years ago, but my mother had a cousin in Łódź, which is the second largest city in Poland, who went with her family, a small son, to Russia. There were many Poles who thought it would be safer in Russia than it would be if they stayed in Poland. That was true, of course, of many people in Poland. So there were literally tens of thousands of Jews that got caught in Russia during the war and sent to Soviet camps. So you might want to see if you can find any information in that online resource. And again, if you want to know what the archives are doing, they even have an update page to say, here's what we recently added. The next immediate step would be to go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which is in Washington, D.C. Prior to the pandemic, I went there every December. I wished I could sleep on the 5th floor because they have this incredible Holocaust library, photographs, other artifacts. And this is above and beyond the main exhibit hall. You go straight to the 5th floor and you'll find the library and the archivists there willing and able to help you. They even have a survivor and victim database, and they have documents from ITS and other digitized collections as well. So again, I've provided the link for you to start to do the online research, and I will show you how to apply for research done on your behalf. Again, this is a free service, but if you're still trying to get compensation for a family member, then your search would be given higher priority. So again, I would suggest start your own research, go to the United States Holocaust Museum website, and I give you a direct link because otherwise you'll spend some time looking for where exactly you're supposed to go in this site. Now, you might be thinking, isn't it duplicative to send a request for information from Arlson as well as to send a request to the Holocaust Museum? So I decided I would ask one of the archivists at the museum that question. Her name is Joellen Decker. She's been absolutely instrumental to me in helping me find connections to my family overseas. Here's what she wrote to me. She said, yes, there is a difference. We are able to search the millions of records we've indexed within our holdings that are not at the ITS. For example, the Holocaust Survivor and Victims Resource Center database has several indexes and in some cases linked documents to the index records. We also search through the ITS database when we receive a research request as well as online resources. If someone asks ITS and us, we get a duplicate report and then we only check our other resources. But of course, sometimes the reports are behind and we do the same search in the ITS collections again. But that's not really a problem for us We're happy to work on them. And she also writes, typically, you know, we search all of the resources at our disposal in order to find additional information. So what if there is some duplication? You know, you'll recognize it, it won't matter. You'll feel better about it because that way you'll know that, in fact, everything has been checked. So again, let me go to the web for just a moment and show you what you might find if you go to the Holocaust Museum. I gave you a direct link to this page. This is where you submit a request for the Holocaust Museum staff to do some research for you. Again, it's going to take quite a bit of time, especially during the pandemic. People have become even more fascinated with their family history, so the staff is overworked and probably underpaid as well. So again, just click on Submit a Request, and you'll go to a form that is extremely simple to fill out. And again, priority is given to people searching, trying to apply for compensation rather belatedly. But if you are a part of a family that has survivors in it, yours will also get priority. When you go to do a search on the Holocaust Museum website, there are two major ways to search. One is for names and one is for lists. Sometimes people ask me, is there a list of all of the lists? And the answer is, if there is one, I haven't found it. That's why I've given you a handout that has all of my lists. But the Holocaust Museum does have lists that you might be interested in, as well as being able to do a search by name. My mother's maiden name was Gallus. And as you can see, I've already done a little bit of a search. There were 219 files by that name, or people by that name. And since I now know who are members of the Gallus family related to me, I can just click on their names, or even better, do you notice that, for example, here under Israel Gallus, can you see that? It says that you can request a copy of the document. So when you click on document request form, you fill it out, it's very short. About 5 minutes later, the document will be in your email. That just floors me. Kim, you've been doing this almost as long as I have, probably longer, come to think of it. And you remember back in the day, genealogy meant writing handwritten notes and asking relatives for answers, or writing overseas and hoping somebody could understand your English because your parents brought you up to speak only two languages. In my case, English and Southern English, you know, and that was it. So now that we can get these answers instantaneously, it's just amazing. I was helping my brother-in-law put together his family. He is a child survivor and a child of survivors from a small town now in Ukraine, right on the Polish border. So I switched over here to do a search for lists, typed in Dobromil, the name of the town, and hit search, and found that there is a list that might be of interest to me. And again, these are hot links. It looks like it is a list of, I did look at it, a list of prisoners in Lemberg, which is also called Lviv and Lvov, not too far from Dobromil. So make sure you look at those lists as well. Let me go ahead before I show you some of the results of my searching. Let me just double check here the chat list and or chat function and see if anybody has a question so far about the ITS, or better known as Erelson, or the Holocaust Museum.
I see Mike Schwartz has a question.
Okay. Can you read it to me, Mike, or is Mike just raising his hand? Okay, Mike, do you want to unmute, please?
I'm sorry, I don't have a question. My hand was raised a long time ago when you asked for people to raise their hand about researching a Holocaust survivor.
Okay.
So I apologize for the confusion. I'm following very nicely.
Okay, not at all, not a problem. All right, so let me show you from my own experience the kind of information that I received from not only the Erelson archives, but also from the Holocaust Museum about 10 years ago. And again, I've been adding to this ever since. This was information that helped me fill in the blanks, especially about my father, who is so very reticent to talk about his experience, and also because he passed away back in 1985. So I wasn't able to get a lot of information from him when it mattered. Let's see, I'm having a little bit of trouble showing you my slides. Let me go ahead and drop down here for just a second. And let's see if I can reboot that so you can see those slides one more time. Okay, I am going to completely reboot my PowerPoint. And I apologize for this, what I hope is a momentary problem.
What would a Zoom meeting be like without having some technological problems?
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. All right, let's see if this works. You now should be able to see the key here is to always have a backup plan, right? So let's see if this works. There we go. Do you now see a card that says Monk Tibor? Can you see that, everyone? Great. Okay. Kim and Debbie Irwin, you knew me when my name was Debbie Munn. But in fact, when my parents became naturalized, they changed the name to Munn. I would have been otherwise Deborah Monk. So you are looking at a folder that is holding records from my father, Tibor Monk, from concentration camp Lager, Mittelbau. Many of you have heard of Mittelbau, also known as Dora Mittelbau or Dora Nordhausen. This is where the Nazis were using slave laborers to build the V-2 rockets that were supposed to crush England. I can see here, if I didn't know this person's birthday, that he was born on the 21st of January 1925 in Újpest, which is the first suburb north of Budapest. And this is his concentration camp number. And I can also see that there are 3 documents inside this folder. And there's the back of this is the front of the folder from another camp where he was, concentration camp Flossenburg. And then inside, you might find documents like this. This is a tracing and documentation card. And again, I'd encourage you to download the Bed Arelson e-guide that would explain what all of this says to you. It not only translates a lot of these terms, but it puts it in context. We're looking at information here that says the date that my father arrived in Flossenburg, which was in September of 44. Again, his birth date, I know that he was single, that he was a Hungarian Jew, that he was from Újpest, and that his occupation was shoemaker, which really floored me. I had no idea that my father knew anything about leather work. And I also see here that that he was in Dora Mittelbau as well. So you can start to put together a timeline. And over the years, what I was able to do was to find out some of the horrible places my father was in. He was deported from this town near Budapest when he was 18 years old. It was 1943. 3,600 young men were taken to Bor, Yugoslavia, to work for, believe it or not, the Siemens Corporation. Yes, that Siemens Corporation, as a slave, digging out copper from the mines there. And as the Nazis became concerned that they were losing the war and the Russian bombers were flying overhead, they took my father and the healthiest of the Jewish young men and forced them on death marches to Flossenburg and to Mittelbau. So again, these documents will help you reconstruct a timeline and perhaps give you some other details as well. Here's a document sent to me by the Holocaust Museum. This is a list of people. Concern, a place I'd never heard about before. Turns out Michael Chambon's book, Moonglow, references Dora Mittelbau and the subcamp known as Belka Kaserne. And the wonderful researchers at the Holocaust Museum found my father's name on this list. So that sent me down another rabbit hole, as these things will do, to find out more about the Belka Kaserne. I discovered that this was a place that where there were 1,500 dying Jewish men and other slave laborers. They were outside of Dora Nordhausen. There was a tunnel where the men were worked to death to build the V-2 rockets. But apparently my father was so ill that he and these 1,500 other men were put in basically a barbed wire enclosure in the Belka barracks and left for dead. And when the Americans arrived, they found these bodies there, and they only realized that some of the men were alive when, as one of them wrote, the skeletons started to move. That's a picture of what one of the American liberators found upon his arrival at Belka Kaserne. You know, I realized by doing this research what a miracle I am to be the daughter of two people who almost didn't survive. It's just an incredible story. Back in the day when I got these documents, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum used to send along an explanation of each one of the documents. That's more rare today, although when you do get the information by email, there will be a cover letter with some explanation. There'll still be a reference to that e-guide, so you'll want to get a hold of that as well. There were some other documents that I've received over the years on my mother. I find there's an interesting history on these index cards because they were filled out by the Allied Expeditionary Forces. In 1945, Europe was in chaos. There were displaced people from all over the world. The cities where there were registration areas were in chaos. Many of the Jews stayed in concentration camps after they had been liberated, not necessarily because they wanted to, but because depending on what zone they were in, the British, the American, the French, or the Soviet zone, sometimes they weren't allowed to go anywhere. So this is a card on my mother, who was known by a variety of names, including Fega, Felicia, Lushka, Lucy, Lucille, you name it, and the wrong birth date. But nevertheless, this is definitely my mother. And again, great genealogical information. If I didn't know that her mother's maiden name was Dobrzinska or that her father was Umbram Galus, I would have that information now. Also, I can see that my mother and as it turns out, my father were at Salzheim, which was a DP camp during very close to Frankfurt with the address. And when I did go to Germany, I went to take a look at the place. Here's another card. This is one that my mother filled out that went into the ITS repository, indicating that she's looking for her brother Chaim, who was born in 1914, her brother Fischl, born in 1921, with some similar information about it. You can see she's writing, Kim and Debbie, can you see that? She's writing from her home on Knox Avenue in Skokie. My mother never gave up, which I think is what drives me to this day, even though my mother has passed on. I am determined to find out the names of the people who died and if they had any children so I could connect with them. There's some other stories, you know, that are in these cards as well. But again, I just wanted to give you a flavor of the kinds of information that you could find here. Clearly, my mother has already been married to my father because the name Monk appears. This was another document that told me a story about my mother. This is a hospital list from the town of Salzwedel. My mother was in this labor camp at the end of the war in northern Germany, not too far from Bergen-Belsen. And she too was liberated by the American soldiers. But my mother was so ill from typhus and malnutrition that even though the other women went through the town once the gates were open and looted the town, my mother was taken by an American soldier to a local hospital. That's what she told me. I didn't have any evidence of it until I saw her name right here. This is the hospital list, the dates that she was in the hospital, again, immediately after the war for apparently about a month and a half. And this was the bill. And I don't know if anybody paid it, but that was the bill for her services. I remember my mother telling me that she was semi-conscious when the camp was liberated, and all she remembers is looking up into the eyes of a Black man. And she had never seen a Black man before. She knew, she was pretty sure it was a soldier, but she also thought that she had died and that God was Black. Later on, I followed up on that story with a neighbor of mine who's a retired American colonel. And he said, if your mother saw a Black man during the war, he was a Jeep driver and he was driving her to the hospital. So that's an entirely possible explanation. These are some registration cards, again, that help me put together the story of sure many of you know, there was no place for the Jews to go. Even the United States was reluctant to take Jewish DPs. There were many DP groups that were taken well ahead of the Jews. We had anti-Semites in the administration. We also had anti-Semites in the military. Patton was a renowned anti-Semites and referred to these Jewish DPs in the most derogatory way. But I can see from these cards that my mother is making every effort to get out of Europe any way she can. You'll notice here that she wants to go to Palestine. And of course, that was owned by the British, and the British weren't letting the Jews go anywhere. Did you know that Bergen-Belsen was under British control until 1951? They weren't letting the Jews go out until 1951. The British were notoriously cruel to the Jews. Not only they keep them out of Israel, keep them in detention camps on Cyprus, they wouldn't let them out of Europe. Here's another similar card that my mother filed. Hey, well, how about Australia? Do you see this reference here? She was stuck in one of the British DP camps initially, and she tried protectorate she could every time, told no. I want to go to England, no. Palestine, no. How about Australia? No. How about Canada? No. And finally, in December of 45, President Truman, thank goodness for President Truman, said, I'll take 20,000 of those people. Most of them were not Jewish, but my parents got on the first boat they could get on in July of 1946, thanks to President Truman, the USS Marine Flasher. And you can see here my mother is saying she's an art painter. I have no idea about that, but she was speaking Polish, Hungarian, and German. So you learn an awful lot about people from the way that they filled out these cards. And again, quite a bit of confirmation about the demographics. Also that you can see at the very bottom that they left from Bremenhaven, thanks to the UN Relief Agency at that time. They came here and they were taken care of a little bit by HIAS as well. Well, that's just one side of the Holocaust Museum. If you go online, you're going to find a very robust website. And not only should you search for names, take a look over here and look at all the different record types that there are. The Holocaust Museum has films, they have objects, they have oral histories like the Shoah Institute, and they have photographs. My mother grew up in a very large town in Poland, in Łódź, or Lodz, as some people call it. And it was one of the best documented ghettos in the war. My mother was in the ghetto from the very beginning in 1940 until it was liquidated in August of 44. And all I had from my mother was a picture of one of her sisters. That's all I had. That's all my mother had. Nothing else remained. So I don't know what my mother's brothers and sisters looked like, but I had a little bit of information about them. And I thought, you know, it was 2008 when I was doing some of this research. There was a recession. I teach real estate, so my teaching was slow. I really dived deeply into any collections of photographs. And what I did was, first I typed in Lodge and looked for any records. There were literally thousands, tens of thousands of photos from the Lodz ghetto. So I decided to narrow it down. I mean, you certainly could use Lodz ghetto, but you would see that your eyes would be bleeding from looking at all of these photographs. I knew that my grandfather was in the leather business, and there were various factories or resorts, as they were called during the times of the ghetto. And there were pictures taken. So I typed in Lodz ghetto leather, and look what I came up with. You see this? It says photograph group portrait of the leather factory workers in the Lodz ghetto. Let me blow that up so you can see it a little bit better. There it is, with a date of 1941. And when I first saw this, I thought I could be looking at members of my mother's family and not know it. I just wouldn't know. But then a little bit later, around 2009, the Lodz ghetto identity cards came online, and my mother's middle brother had an ID card in that collection. This was the brother that stayed with her during the times of the ghetto. The other brothers and sisters were dispersed by the parents, some to Russia, some to Krakow. Well, when I looked at my uncle's card, let me ask you if you see a resemblance between my uncle, Menachem Yehuda Galus, and anybody else in that photo, because I think that's my uncle, sitting to the right of this bearded man. I'll never know for sure, but again, this record actually came from Jewish Gen. I'll show you how I acquired it, but later on I was able to compare it to this photo. Not only do I believe this is my uncle Menachem, I think this is my mother's father, because my mother said that her father was a religious man. He always wore a hat. He had a white beard. You'll notice he's sitting next to the man I believe is my uncle, and they are holding, he is holding a pelt of leather. I'll never know for sure. But I also received a photo of this man right here behind the ID card, who I know is my grandfather's brother. So I believe I'm looking at 3 members of my family: my great uncle, my grandfather, and my uncle. So again, the Holocaust Museum has more than just documents online. They have more than just photographs online. They have very robust books and other kinds of resources. And right now, if you're trying to get the backstory on what happened to your family, one of the fastest ways of doing that is to go to the part of the Holocaust Museum's website where they have their first 2 volumes of encyclopedias of camps and ghettos freely available. You can certainly buy these books for your JGS, but they're very, very expensive. And quite frankly, you can search more quickly if you're doing it online through these books. And in these books, you're going to find information about the major concentration camps, subcamps, the construction brigades, and volume 2 has information about all of the ghettos. And what I really like is that these articles have been extremely well written. The articles are very, very brief, but they are also footnoted. Again, volume 3 is going to be coming online pretty soon. That is the information about the camps and ghettos in areas that were allied with the Nazis. But right now you can find an awful lot of information from these 2 resources. I wanted to find out more about Salzwedel, line up the story that my mother had shared with me about this camp being mostly for women, that there were mostly Polish women. She told me some stories about what had happened to her in this camp. She was taken from the Lodz ghetto to Auschwitz. Her parents were both immediately murdered. She was then taken to Bergen-Belsen, from Bergen-Belsen to Salzwedel. And I found her story lining up with this particular passage from this book. Now, clearly there are other books on just Salzwedel, on the Holocaust, but if you're just beginning your research and you're trying to get context and do timelines and figure out where people were, this is a great place to go. And every article noted. I'm a footnote devotee. If I see something interesting, I will look up these resources, and if they're in anything that I could translate to English, I'm going to read the primary source. Needless to say, when the pandemic lifts, it's time to go to Washington, isn't it? Now, you've got a wonderful Holocaust, several Holocaust museums in South Florida, but the Holocaust Museum, the national one, is the 2nd largest Holocaust museum in the world. And the people there are incredibly helpful. You'll probably run into scholars and authors and genealogists there on your visit. The building is worth spending just a day in to see the exhibits, and then plan on a couple of days in the library. This is just one very small snippet of what the library has. I could just walk for hours, if not days, down the stacks and discover books I didn't even know existed. There are people there who will help you. So if you want them to bring up the survivor, or the concentration camp information and explain it to you, there'll be somebody who can do it there. Very often the people there read more than just English. You can also find these folks available without making an appointment, but I would encourage you to make an appointment if you're going to be doing a lot of intense work there. Okay, so that is the information about both the ITS and the Holocaust Museum. Let me stop sharing for just a moment and see if there are any questions in chat, or anybody who'd like to ask a question so far. And Kim and Jim, if you'll help me, if anybody is raising their hands, I might not be able to see them.
I'd suggest if anybody has a question, just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, this is Mike Schwartz. I have a question.
Okay, Mike.
So far, your excellent presentation has focused on records surrounding the camps and then the displaced person camps afterwards. What kinds of records, and maybe you'll be covering this, but what kinds of records exist for those who were murdered before the camps were really established? I have a Yad Vashem testimony that says that my great uncle was murdered in his town in 1942.
Okay.
Are there any other records, you know, that would corroborate that, would give me more detail on that and so forth?
That's a great question, Mike, and I will answer that
Great.
a little bit down the road, but I already
Perfect.
actually did cover one possible resource you should go back and double check, and that is at the Holocaust Museum's website, look under lists and type the town where your relative was murdered. Okay,
Okay.
don't forget those lists. Those are
Right.
really important. But I also want to set your expectations. When the Nazis committed wholesale genocide and dumped bodies into pits,
Yeah.
it's very unlikely that they kept records.
Gotcha.
However, there are several projects. For example, Father Patrick Deborah, you've probably heard about
heard,
his
yes.
work. You may not be able to find a list, but he's talking to the witnesses. There are people who saw these murders and they recognize people in the town. And if you listen to their verbal testimonies, you may hear a reference to a family member.
Mhm.
But again, during certain periods of the war, particularly June 1941, it was just wholesale slaughter.
Yeah.
And unlikely, unless there's some DNA work that you can do, if the graves are unearthed and DNA is taken, it's highly unlikely, but you never know. You could get lucky.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Here's your third resource. After you work with the Holocaust Museum and the Arleston Archives, I want you to fill out a form with the International Red Cross. I have to say, I have had a very jaundiced view of the Red Cross. I inherited it, honestly, from my father. When he came back to Budapest after the war, he was coming back on a very crowded train. He had already married my mother. When they got off the train, the Red Cross was there taking names, and my mother insisted that he give the Red Cross his name, and he said, I'm not going to do it. First of all, they had a cross on their name, not a Jewish star. He had heard that the Red Cross had been easily duped by the Nazis, which we all know was particularly true. And my father just never trusted anybody in authority again. He said, you cannot trust people in uniform. So he didn't give his name. And as a result, every one of his surviving family members in Budapest and Újpest thought he was dead. He looked around Budapest for a while, made a wonderful discovery. He did find his mother who had survived Auschwitz, but he refused to give his name. In more recent years, however, when I would write to the Red Cross on behalf of my mother, we'd usually get no answer or an answer with absolutely nothing. But because of the internet, the Red Cross has sped up its responses and also does a much more thorough investigation. They have records on 400,000 people that were in World War II concentration camps, and they have a center. You will talk to somebody in the Sarasota area from your local Red Cross who will put you in contact with the Baltimore Red Cross, who will then get in touch with the International Red Cross. And again, there's no fee for a search for somebody who was lost between 1933 and 1957. Again, you have to fill out a form. There's always a form, but it will be forwarded on, and you might be surprised. You might find some information. The Red Cross does work even in Israel, which is not an easy place for us to research here in the United States. So the Red Cross works with the Red Crescent chapters, Magen David Adom, and other archives and organizations. I was very, very surprised when I got a response at all when I wrote to the Red Cross back in 2010, because typically these searches result in absolutely nothing or no response or an incomplete response. It is free, so you can't be too unrealistic. But again, I had a pleasant surprise. In February 2010, I got a new lead on a cousin my mother never mentioned to me. It was one of her first cousins. And I discovered that she might have survived the war. And when I made that discovery, I contacted the International Red Cross that month. I filled out a form, and take a look at this. In 2 months, 2 months, I received documents that said that at least as of 1964, my mother's cousin, Sipra, was alive and living in Israel. And, you know, it's one of these bittersweet moments when you realize, oh my God, I found somebody, but it's too late. You know, too late for my mother, who had passed away by the time I'd gotten this information. Still, I persisted. And what happens is the Red Cross will call you up. They'll make an appointment for somebody to come to your door because I think they're afraid you're going to faint dead away. So whether they have good news or bad news, they always bring it to you in person. And here's what was delivered to me. You remember again, my mother's family name was Gallus. And here's Zipporah, spelled with a Z. Zipporah Rafaeli, born Gallus, first married Rubenstein, born in Yezhov. Now, I knew this was the right family because that's where my mother's ancestral village is, a small village just east of Łódź. And what this form did was open up an incredible number of trails for me to follow. I now knew her first husband. She was old. This was a cousin who was the oldest cousin in my mother's family. She apparently had lost that first husband somehow. She was married to a new person. There's her birth date, the address of her arrest. That means when she was deported. The date of her second marriage in Haifa. What happened to her when she fled from the ghetto? And again, that's kind of an unusual story in and of itself, because as you know, if you know anything about the Łódź ghetto, you know it was hermetically sealed. After liberation, she went to Łódź and everybody went back to their hometowns to look to see if anybody survived. There were 30,000 Jews who came back from Russia alone in the mid 1940s. And then again, this very long story that I was able to glean from these forms that she actually got to Palestine. She was head on Cyprus, and then she eventually got to Israel. Again, there was a stopover in Cyprus. You know what that means. They were stopped by the British from landing in what then was Palestine. The second document was in many ways sweet because it revealed that Sipra had a son. And what I was able to glean from a number of other sources once I knew that Sipra had a son was this son and her husband were taken to Siberia. The husband died from typhus, malnutrition, and diphtheria in Tashkent. Again, there were a lot of Polish Jews trapped in Siberia. They wound up going to Tashkent once the Russians formed an alliance with the Allies. And what Sipra did, since she had a son, a little boy, a baby boy, she put him on a train to Palestine, and he became part of another story about the Holocaust called The Children of Tyran. So he is there by himself. He's 12 years old. He's floating around a lot of different kibbutzes. Many of the very religious Jews in Israel were fighting over these kids and how they were going to be raised. He presumably was kind of a wild kid. He learned how to drive a Jeep. He joined the Palmach, and he was ambushed along with other Palmach soldiers in the Battle of Gush Etzion. By the time Sipra gets there, her son is dead. It's one of the, you know, most of these stories are sad about the Holocaust. Most of them are sad. This is one of the saddest ones that I saw in my family history. So again, you do want to check with the Red Cross. There may be a gold mine there. You heard Mike mention Yad Vashem, a very fertile website for Holocaust researchers. You can simply Google Yad Vashem and you will get right to that website. There are lots of different things to know about the Yad Vashem website. And one thing is that the resources that are on the website were never intended to be used for genealogy. They were a way of just collecting information. And of course, what has happened in the last 15, 20 years is genealogists like me and like you have been going into that website to find any information that can connect our families. And as a result, Yad Vashem, the organization, has had to do a rethinking about how the information can be found and how it can be used. So the simplest thing would be to start by going to the part of the website which is the central database of Shoah victims' names, as you see here, and typing in your family name. Notice over here on the right that the site is available in numerous languages. So, for example, you'll notice that I put in my mother's last name here. I didn't put in anything specific other than the town she was from. You have to have at least a last name. And you can do a more specified search here if you want to refine your search even more if you click on advanced search. But when I typed in Lodge and Gallus, you can see I had any number of records, 37 records. And as you might imagine, I went through every single one. But the most important ones for me were not these lists, but rather the pages of testimony, sometimes abbreviated as POT, because these are personal recollections of people who know that a person has died. Most of the time it's a family relative, but it doesn't have to be. So of all of the many things that you could find on this website, I'd encourage you to start with the pages of testimony because they are the most robust source of information. Here's an example of a page of testimony my mother filed on her mother. And you can see from the date that she filed it almost immediately when Yad Vashem started. So again, here's the name Gallus. Her name, her mother's name was Hinda Deborah. I'm Deborah Hinda Devoira, which is the Polish version of Deborah, I guess. And information here about how her mother died. And you know, my mother had very distinctive handwriting. I would know this is her handwriting even if she hadn't signed it. Her spelling isn't great. My mom spoke 7 languages. I don't know what I expect, but she very bitterly put this in no way to be misunderstood. Circumstances of death put in the gas chamber, Auschwitz, and then misspelled Auschwitz. What's also very important, take a look down here, look at the person who is providing that information, because you can now search by the name of the witness. So if Felicia Brenner added any other testimonies that weren't under the name of Gallus, I can now search under her name. And what many people have done, and I would encourage you, beg you to do this as well, is if you don't have a page of testimony for your relative, once you confirm to the best of your ability that they were murdered in the Holocaust, go to Yad Vashem and create a page of testimony. Let's not allow the deniers to continue their lies. Let's continue to build that repository of evidence. And so again, create a page of testimony, as well as look for other testimonials from the people who were witnesses. I'll give you an example of what I did when I was looking for my brother-in-law's information most recently. He's been one of my toughest clients, so to speak. He didn't want to share any information with me. He didn't want to know, but eventually his daughters begged me to find out any information I could. So here we are at the Yad Vashem website. And I've typed in his name, not the way that he spells it. Marty Kramer is actually Kraemer, but it really doesn't matter. As you all know, spelling doesn't count. And I put in the town in Ukraine where he was from to see, did anybody else from his little shtetl get registered here? And here we can see murdered, evacuated to the interior of the Soviet Union. These are all interesting to me. And then, of course, there's a number here that says there's more than one record. As I started to uncover information about my brother-in-law, I begged him and eventually got him to fill out pages of testimony. So we're actually going to be looking at those right here. I'm going to click on Kramer. It's going to open up to the 3 pieces of information that are available about Marty's family, or in this case, Marty's father, who was Fievel Kramer, born in 1905. And you can see this is actually a form that I filled out and had my brother-in-law sign. You can click on it, it'll blow up. And also you can see that I had him post a picture of his father. So again, part of our information is to add to the body of knowledge. And what a great way to do that here on the Yad Vashem website. So again, Mike had asked me about lists, but I think he mentioned that he had already looked for lists and names. So again, I'll show you some other places you can go for lists, but this might be a resource for those of you who haven't gone to the Yad Vashem website. Some of you I know are doing that just as I speak, and that's great. Love to be fact checked. So again, don't overlook the advanced search function, which allows you to put in the name of the submitter or the witness, because you may find that they have listed other people in the village, friends, So don't just do a casual check of this site. There's a lot of information there. And there's also an e-guide to the information that you find so you can understand it a little bit better. And when this pandemic lifts, and I know it will, it's time to go to Israel. How many of you have been? Okay, time to go back. And if you haven't visited Yad Vashem, this is an opportunity to immerse yourself in scholarly research as well as genealogical databases. One of the things that I enjoy doing, I spent 5 days at Yad Vashem, was walking around, seeing the exhibits. There is a valley of the community. So if your people came from a little shtetl like mine did, you might actually find that there's some information about the shtetl that has been commemorated in a work of stone. The permanent exhibit, of course, is beyond words. There's also a cemetery, so to speak, a cave that was created by survivors who paid for stones to be put inside this cave that would commemorate the people that they lost. To my knowledge, these stones have not been indexed anywhere, and they should be. They're no different really than any cemetery. I would think that Jobar would be the world burial record, the Jewish burial records, I imagine, have this on their list. I should really find out. The first thing I noticed when I walked into this cave was a stone that my mother created. I said that she left breadcrumbs. She actually left stones everywhere she went. If she went to Miami, she put a stone there for her parents at the Miami Memorial Museum. There's one, of course, here in Skokie as well, because my mother had no grave. So she created gravestones. And as you can see, again, if I didn't know anything about my family, I would have found a wealth of information, including names in Hebrew. So this stuff is not anywhere on the internet. The only way to get to it is to go there. And sad to say, Yad Vashem's digital collection, other than what I showed you, is not great. I don't know if it's a matter of funding or staffing, but they haven't digitized everything. The last day that I was there in 2014, I was exhausted. I'd been in their library, looked at everything. I thought I'd looked at everything, was on their computer, and I thought, I'm going to just do one more thing. I'm going to Google the town of Yezhov and see if there's anything about that ancestral village that is specifically in the Yad Vashem database. Now, again, there's no way to do this right now except to go there. Are you listening, Mike? You gotta go there. And I fully expected not to find a single thing on the town of Yezhov. And you know what happened, right? Because what I did find was that there was a testimony that was written by my cousin, Sipra Rubenstein Raffaelli, all about what happened to her from Lodz to the Siberian to Siberia to the DP camps to Cyprus, and then what happened to her son. So I was able to find a record in Polish and in Hebrew, which I had translated to fill in the gaps. Again, it's not anywhere in any other museum or repository that I'm aware of. So getting to this computer might be very, very useful. To my knowledge, again, it's only available if you go there. It would be inappropriate of me to say that JewishGen is just one of many resources. It's not the first one I would go to, but it is probably the third, fourth, or fifth resource that I would go to about the Holocaust, because JewishGen maintains its own Holocaust database within the larger database of JewishGen. And they have more than 2.75 million records from 200 different databases. Mike, I presume you've checked to see if there are any lists that are available on JewishGen. You can go directly to the Holocaust database on JewishGen or just do a search under a name, but sometimes it's helpful to go just to the database itself. And I'll show you what happened to me back in 2009, shortly after my mother passed. This JewishGen was just kind of getting its legs at that time. And I typed in the name Gallus, and up popped this list, 773 total matches. And being the obsessive compulsive person that I was, I looked at every single link here. And it's a good thing that I did. It's a good thing I didn't just focus in on Lodz, because I found something under Krakow ghetto, and it really confused look like. This was another example of the run I did in 2017, but originally it was in 2009. And I called up my sister, Judy, here in the Chicago area. And I said, wasn't one of Mom's sisters Blumka Sarah? And didn't she have a brother named Sruel? And I was so ignorant at that time about Jewish genealogy. I didn't know about this flexibility of names. I didn't know that Sruel was a nickname for Israel. I had no idea. I mean, how do you get from Israel to Sruel? Actually pretty easily, right? Israel, Sruel. So my sister confirmed, yes, two of Mom's siblings, one was Bluma or Blumka Sarah in Israel, and said, why are they showing up in the Krakow ghetto? They were in the Lodz ghetto. And my sister reminded me that my grandparents sent their children, they dispersed them. 2 stayed with them in Lodz, 2 went to Russia, 3 went to Krakow. So this is why a brother and a sister showed up in Krakow. And I realized, oh my goodness, you know, there's information here. And at the time, there was a link down at the bottom that's or up here at the top that you could link on. You could email the resource where this information was. And it looked to me like it was a microfilm of some kind. So, you know, knowing that I can't write in Polish, but I can use Google Polski, I somehow managed to create an email to what turned out to be the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. And I said, would you send me whatever information you have in these microfilm reels? I'm willing to pay you whatever your charges are. I get an email back in 24 hours, which was stunning to me. Can you imagine? 24 hours later, you have information when it used to take me months and years. And so the archivist there says, oh, there's no charge. And yes, we'll be happy to send you what we have. And by the way, just so you know, there may be pictures. I was floored. I wrote back again in Google Polski saying, you know, I'll pay extra to get it, you know, sent FedEx, but they were sending it by email. So the next day during one of my teaching breaks, I see an email from the Jewish Historical Society. I open it up. Okay, because again, you know, there were 19,000 registration forms. I had no idea that the Nazis kept ID cards, much less photo ID cards. Open up the first email, and I almost passed out because this was an identity card for my mother's second oldest sister. And if you knew what my mother looked like, there was no question that this was a sister. Looks an awful lot like my mother. And it was not only bittersweet because I got these photos too late, but also bittersweet because when my mother was slowly dying in the nursing home, she used to call me Blumka Sarah. Apparently she thought that I looked like her. And then of course, couldn't help myself, clicked on the second link, and there was a picture of my mother's youngest brother who died at the age of 14 in Belzec. They both died in Belzec. So again, you have to prepare yourself emotionally for what you're going to find. There's some interesting information on these protocol cards that my aunt and uncle apparently worked for the Judenrat, the Council of Jews who were managing this ghetto, but it can be a terrible walk down history's lane. Also on Jewish Gen, again, the databases are being added to every single day. This is where I found a month after I got my other two, in my aunt and uncle's picture, I got this picture of my mother's middle brother, the one that she felt guilty about. He swapped places with her. He got sent to a labor camp. She stayed with her parents. This is a breathtaking artifact. Not only do I have information about my uncle and his photo and his very robust handwriting, but I can see a transport number here. Do you see transport 69 stamped here? Can you see that? You know, and also what kind of work he did in the ghetto. I called a friend of mine in Germany who told me your uncle was lucky in some ways because transport 69 meant that he wasn't taken to Chelno. He was taken instead to the place of yellow death. He was taken to Częstochowa, and from Częstochowa, where he worked for the Nazis with pyrrhic acid, in January of 44, I was able to pick up the trail. He was taken to Buchenwald, and in a later database that was added just a couple of years ago, I found this card on Jewish Gen. This is a card written in Czech that said that my uncle was liberated from Theresienstadt. There was a death march from Buchenwald to Theresienstadt after the quarantine for typhus was over, my uncle walked out of that camp, and I've never been able to find him. I know he was alive in the summer of 1945. He also appears on a list of the surviving remnant, Shahir, let's see if I can pronounce it, Sharit Hatapla. I'm sure I'm butchering that. So I know he was alive into the summer of 45, and then he drops off the face of the earth. The most amazing thing that I have now found on JewishGen is that the Spielberg Foundation, which created those wonderful video recordings of survivors in the 90s, has now given permission to JewishGen to share their index. So when I recently went on to JewishGen and typed in the name Gallus, this was a new list for me. And let me show you, if you click on these records, what you see. Again, these are testimonies from the University of Southern California, which were produced, paid for essentially by the Spielberg Foundation, 52,000 video testimonies in 32 languages from 56 countries. There's the general search engine. You can go right to the Shoah Foundation, but if you click through to the JewishGen link, instead of going this way and searching for my mother, let me skip ahead to this page. If you click on that link from Yad Vashem, I'm sorry, I've accidentally skipped a slide. I was wondering what's going on. Hold on just one moment, please. Sorry about that mistake. Well, better yet, I'm just going to take you there. Maybe that's why I just skipped the link. I was going to show it to you. Okay, so here again, we are at the, forgive me for that mistake. We are here at the JewishGen website. I've typed in the name Gallus. I see there are all of these Shoah testimonies that mention, wow, my grandfather, my grandmother, sisters and brothers, and I can click on any one of them. And here's Felicia Brenner, who I know is my mother, but let's just go to that testimony. And it takes me exactly to my mother's testimony. Let me pause here for just a moment and show you. Back here for just a moment. If I were instead to click on view full record, it would show you why the Galluses are showing up under Felicia Brenner. Somebody at the Shoah Foundation has, or some people have digitized the entire recording. They've transcribed it and digitized it. So if my mother mentioned a brother or a sister like Blumka, and any information about her whatsoever, I can link directly to that part of the testimony. Isn't that absolutely amazing? So again, you could look directly by going to the Shoah Foundation's website, or you can click through from JewishGen. And let's take a look at what we will see if we scroll through this page. Let me see if I can bring it down a little bit. Okay, so if we look here in the bottom of these colored bars, we can see all of the topics that my mother addresses in her video. And the reason this would be important to somebody like Mike is you may not be able to find your family member's name in a list, but if you know the name of the town, chances are there is a survivor who recorded testimony about that town. I couldn't find anything about my brother-in-law's family. I didn't find a lot of documents, but I found a lot of people who had been in Dobromil at the time that the Nazis and the Ukrainians had started to slaughter the Jews. Let me just go ahead and give you an example of what that testimony might sound like. I'll cue this up to a part in the testimony where my mother is talking about deportation. Let me know if you can hear my mother's testimony in just a second.
And I thanked God because I said in one of these wagons, there is my mother. I looked around And the whole depot was like in that movie that we saw, the Schindler's List. 1,000 people at least, children crying for their mother, the mothers for their children. How do I find my mother? Which wagon? Out of sheer desperation, I saw a Gestapo officer standing there like a, like a sculptor, no emotions in his face, and people running around him. And out of sheer desperation, I walked over to him and I said, Herr Officer, ich come freiwillig, which means I come on my own, I come freely. I said, please help me find my mother. And lo and behold, God showed his miracle. That officer came with me. He was pulling my hair in the back because I was running ahead of him. And he gave an order to one of the soldiers to knock on the door, and I gave him the name of my mother, Galas, and I heard that soldier call Galas, Galas, and I heard my mother's voice. And that officer told that soldier to open the door. And there, inside, stood my mother. The date was August 7, 1944, a date I shall never forget.
Hard for me to listen to that, but I'm so glad I have my mother's testimony. She actually did 3 different testimonies. I was able to locate and get copies of all of them. They've been an incredible personal archive for me. You may not be able to view the testimonies online, so let me share with you how you would get those testimonies if you were, if all you had was a link. Let's see if I can pull this up here. If you go to the Shoah website, you can find where the testimonies can be viewed. And I know you live near major universities and libraries, and typically what will happen, I live in the Chapel Hill area, so there are 3 universities I could go to that would allow me to listen to the video testimonies there. Don't get discouraged if it isn't a live Shoah testimony like the one I showed you, but once the libraries start to open up, you should be able to go to a very close location and be able to listen to the testimonies. Again, this was important for me because I sometimes research different towns. Now, I don't always research Poland or Hungary, but towns that are not that familiar to me in different countries. So having this resource, and it's also available on Ancestry as I put here, is going to be a great way for you to get backstory. Again, you might not get the names of the people who died, but you can get some backstory as well. Let me also point out that, again, this is primarily here for Mike. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. Show a quick search. Yes, you see up here, index, people search, places search. Can you see my screen right now? No. Okay, let me go back to the internet. Okay, I'm gonna log back in. And you can do a search up here of people and places. So if I wanted to know more about what happened to my brother-in-law's family, I could type in Dobromil and see if anybody has given a testimony. I misspelled it. They're not going to find Dobromil, I don't think. Dobromil, there we go. And it's correcting me, spelling it a different way. And now you'll see, Mike, I've got 23 testimonies from people who had something to do with Dobromil. And if you click on any one of them, and I'll just click on one at random, it will tell me over here, if we have enough time, to, is it in English? Is it, what language is it in? Will I be able to view it online, or will it take some time for me to go to a library and find it? So don't overlook that resource. It's been wonderful for me to hear from witnesses in my mother's ancestral village about information that might be useful. Let me give you some other minor, but what could be very, very important resources for you. Let's start with Yisker books, and I'm going to go through these very quickly because, again, you do have my list. Yisker books, as you know, are memorial books that were written about the history of destroyed Jews after the war. They're usually a compilation of essays where daily life in that town is described before and during and even after the war. Sometimes there are photographs and other stories about people who were murdered. Unfortunately for me, they're mostly in Hebrew or Yiddish, but there is an organization within Jewish Gen, the Yisker Book Translation Effort, which is slowly starting to get more and more of these books translated. And you can go to Yisker Books and find the Jewish Gen Project, or you can also go to the New York Public Library, which holds 730 Yisker books. About 650 of them are already online. So if you can read Hebrew and or Yiddish, you're going to have a final time of it. But check Jewish Gen first, because many of them already have been translated. I'm working on the translation project right now, gathering funds for a small town near Krakow called Jesko, and I had a very nice donation that'll allow us to get another 60 pages done. So don't overlook Yisker books. Here's the one that there were two Yisker books from Deborah. I bought them both on eBay to see if there was anything about the Kramers, and sure enough, turned out Bearish Kramer was my brother-in-law's great uncle, and he writes about what happened to my brother-in-law's family. He mentions the grandparents, he mentions fathers, mothers, people that were very important to Marty. He just didn't even know who his grandparents were until I connected the dots. And then here I find this incredible Yisker book about that specifically mentions his family. Another great website is the stevemorse.org website. I'm sure a lot of you have used it to find information about immigration records, but Steve also has a section, if you go to this page, that is called the Holocaust, and he's got any variety of resources here, including lists, Mike, that might be of use to you. And when I first discovered this list, I immediately made use of the Lodge Cemetery, as well as, you see this one here called Siberian Refugee Camps. Again, knowing that Sipra and her little boy and her husband were in a camp, I thought perhaps they were somewhere in that list. So this is a very thorough, or rather a very long list that I would assume that some of you would find helpful. Again, I went to this one on the Siberian refugee camps and turned up this card on Sipra's husband. There he is, Mendel Rubenstein. His father's name was Jacob. He was born in 1905, deported in the Vologda district. This is when they were sent to Siberia with information in English and Polish. And then when you click on the English or Polish version, you get the index card, already nicely typed up, that tells you more about deportation, exile, release, where they were in Siberia in terms of the general area as well as the city. There are a lot more general websites. Landsmannschaften, I'm sure a lot of you have heard Nolan Altman's talk about this. These are organizations that are in Israel as well as in the United States. Many of them have become defunct because the people who are interested in establishing them have passed on. But if you want to see if there's a Landsmannschaften for the town, and Mike, again, you're doing some town research here. You're trying to find out who was murdered in this town. Check out these older issues of Avutenu. If you don't know how to get your hands on those older issues, let me know. Also check out Kahila links, because a lot of people like me have decided that we want to create a virtual commemoration of our ancestors as well. I bet some of you have Kahila links that you've created. This is the one that I did for Yezhuv, that little ancestral village, and I list all of these resources for people who are doing research, including Holocaust research as well. And again, a simple Google of your town or the name of the town plus Kahila links will get you where you need to go. Nothing like getting your feet on the grounds. Every city you go to that has a Holocaust memorial may have some kind of a memorial wall or cemetery. This is the Miami Memorial. Here's my mother who appears to be praying in front of it. She had all of her Gallus family members listed on that wall. And it was the shock of my life when I went to Weepest in 1985 with my father, who was already very, very ill, that he told me he had been bar mitzvahed. I had no idea he had a religious life. We went to his synagogue, and inside the wall, inside the cemetery, there was a courtyard with a wall, and I discovered my father's name on it. And my father and I are laughing and crying and laughing and crying because there's his name. There's the name of his father. And I said, why are you on the wall of the dead? And that's when he told me the story about he refused to give his name to the Red Cross. So his relatives who had survived thought he was dead and put his name up there. This also, by the way, became a lead for me because I was able to track down 2 living cousins in Hungary who had no idea that my father had survived and had moved to the United States. Also went to synagogue, a database that had indexed all the names of the Holocaust dead who somehow wound up in Stockholm. And the first time I found out that there were Jews in Stockholm, I felt like I was listening to a Mel Brooks movie. You know, Jews in Sweden, who knew? I think of all the blondes and the blue-eyed people, who knew there were Jews in Stockholm? As it turns out, there is a wall, a Holocaust memorial wall there, and look whose names I found on it. Gallus family members. I have to tell you, this was one of the happiest moments of my life, because these were my mother's cousin's kids. And even though these kids had passed away in 2008 and I was there in 2012, I found their kids. So I found my only second cousins. Second cousins is as good as it gets for me. For me, that's as good as it's ever going to get. And we had the most joyful reunion. Don't forget to check cemeteries. The Jewish cemeteries in many cases are in disrepair, but what many people have done is come back to those cemeteries, and if their deceased relative hasn't been buried, they create a burial spot of their own, as they have in the Lodz Cemetery. In walking around this cemetery, I found the names of Popinskis, who also went to Sweden, who also turned out to be relatives of mine. So again, cemetery walking is kind of a pastime of mine. You never know what you're going to find. Go to the Holocaust museums. They also have libraries, repositories. If you haven't been to Skokie, other than the wonderful hot dogs across the street at Portillo's, I think this is a great place to visit. They've done a wonderful job with this smaller museum where my mother was a founder. Deborah, when you've probably been there, there's a bench right outside the entrance with my mother's name on it. And again, you can find family names there, and inside you may find some other information as well. There are Holocaust monuments, memorials, museums all over the world, and on this Wikipedia site you can find a list of them. And let's not forget that many of the concentration camp and labor sites are doing a pretty good job of gathering information where they can and creating museums and libraries. Bergen-Belsen is run by a man with incredible sensitivity, and they have done an incredible job of memory work in Germany altogether. I am surprised to hear myself saying it, but the Germans are teaching Holocaust history. They've been doing so for decades, not always willingly, but now more so, whereas Poland is just kind of getting its act together. So take a look at the memorials and the museums, and also look under the Wikipedia site for information about concentration, labor, and extermination camps. There's an association of Holocaust organizations. Don't forget, Israel has a great deal of information. This is not an easy group to work with. The Central Zionist Archives are reluctant to provide information, but they do have genealogy databases as well as files on people that came over before, during, and after the war. Remember, name changes are very likely. My Dobrzinski cousins changed their name to De Vere, making it a little bit challenging to find them. Also, there is a subset of Google called Google Books. When we go to Google, we usually just type in whatever we're looking for, but Google Books, and you'll be taken to a section of Google where books have been digitized. So I decided I'm going to, again, just try my luck. I typed in the name Dobrzinski and was led to this book. the Chronicle of the Lodz Ghetto and found a reference to my mother's cousin Itchik and an explanation of what happened. As you probably know, the children were taken out of the Lodz Ghetto. About 10,000 children were snatched out of the hands of their parents, and my mother's two cousins committed suicide when that happened. They jumped off one of the three bridges, famous bridges over the town of Lodz. And even though it's pretty easy to find a book like this in a library, if you don't have access, easy access to a library, if you want this book and your library doesn't have it, go to WorldCat. And if you don't know about that, let me know and I'll explain to you how to find it, how to find the book. Again, highest records, the American Joint has records. If you are looking for people who might have gone to Israel, I'd encourage you to go to Banja Unterschat. She used to run the Jewish agency. She's the one that took all those names as people were coming in, but she does charge a fee. But if you have relatives who went there, she may be able to find them. Again, all of this information is in my handout. Once you get started on your search, ask for help. I've created a Facebook page for my uncle so that if anybody's looking for the name Gallus, this is going to pop up. It's basically, I don't keep it up very much because nothing lately has happened, but get your name out there on Facebook. There is an organization called allgenerations.org. It costs $18 a year, and they put out a bulletin once a month, and they do searches. They'll say so-and-so is searching for so-and-so. And on occasion, you read these happy stories about people, even now, 75 years after the Holocaust, who find each other, brothers who find each other, cousins, friends, thanks to allgenerations.org and its Together email bulletin. Doesn't hurt, right, to try. And then during Holocaust Remembrance Days, and we have one coming up pretty soon, usually the universities have a reading of the names. It's really important that young people hear those names being read. As you know, about 1/3 of young American people have never heard of the word Auschwitz. They don't believe that 6 million people or more died. Jewish people died in the Holocaust. So get out there and publicize your search. Deuteronomy warns us what happens if we don't. Only guard yourself and guard your soul carefully, lest you forget the things your eyes saw, and lest these things depart your heart all the days of your life. And you shall make them known to your children and to your children's children. To end, I'd like to read from an Israeli poet who writes about the importance of remembering those names. Now 2 generations of forgetting have passed, and the first generation of remembering has arrived. Woe to us that already have arrived at remembering, for memories are the hard shell of an empty heart. In a little while, people will walk through fields and cities with something like nature lovers' plank guides at hand, and they will call to one another. Here, I have found it, no mistake. Here are the signs. Here's the characteristic color of the eyes and the hair. Here is the well-known smile. This is its fragrance, and this is its name. This was a friend of a friend. This a woman of long ago. This one is the image of my father, and this the image of me and you. When you will flower and when you will wilt. This is the scientific name, and this is the common name between lovers and friends. And this is a name with no person, and this is a person with no name. And this is how it was. I hope you've found some useful material in this presentation, and I bet if we open up the mics, Jim and Kim, that you will hear your members provide some other suggestions for great research.
Well, Deborah, I'll throw out a quick comment and then a quick question. Is you mentioned earlier about your struggle with connecting the Hebrew name Israel with whatever the equivalent.
Srul.
So just by coincidence, last week I ordered a book that's out of print, but it was published by Avatenu, and it's called A Dictionary of Ashkenazic Given Names, Their Origins, Structure, Pronunciations, and most importantly, I think, migrations, because I was having similar issues, but it's available used. And actually, if anybody has a need for that, I'll be happy to look up anything for anybody. And then my question for you is, for these locations where we're doing actual registrations, particularly the Arrowson archives, should we complete a registration form for each individual we're researching, or how does
Yes.
that
Yes, for every single one you have a name for.
do a separate registration?
Separate, but it's pretty easy, Jim, because you can save the information about yourself, that you are requesting and as a family member. You don't have to keep retyping that. The only thing you'll have to do, there is a place where you could put a family, a cohort, if you want to do it that way, but I'd recommend every single name gets a separate application form.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. I'd like to ask Kim a question, if that's okay. Kim, were you aware, and Debbie Irwin, were you aware growing up about all the Holocaust survivors in Skokie?
I was, yeah.
You were, Debbie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you know my family. I don't know of anyone in my family, let's put it that way.
Did you know that my family, my mother and father?
Yes, because I don't know if you remember, but when you lived on Howard Street, I used to come visit you.
That's right.
So
I was just wondering about that. Kim, did you know that Skokie was basically Polish and Hungarian, German shtetls revisited?
Back when I was growing up as a kid, no.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't discussed in school. We were unlikely to get past World War I. And what a shame, what a lost resource for the teachers there.
For sure. But I was still in Skokie with the march, you know. And I remember I wanted to go, stupid me, I guess, to go to Eden's, where they were supposed to get off the expressway. My parents said, don't you go over there.
Well, I was already living in Florida, and I called my mother and she said, Debbie, I just wanted to let you know I'm saving rotten eggs in the basement. Are you doing that? She says, the Nazis are walking down my street again. They walked down once, they're not going to walk down twice. I said, so what about the rotten eggs? She said, I'm going to throw the rotten eggs at them. They're not coming again. And of course, if you can imagine 60-year-old Jewish people, not only with rotten eggs, they were armed. There was going to be violence if the Nazis made it down there. So it's quite a story.
Yeah.
Who else would yes.
Debbie, it's not a question, just a comment. First of all, what great information. Your information base is amazing. But more than that, just emotionally so powerful. For whatever it's worth, absolutely that's your uncle and your grandfather.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you. There are so many I wishes. We all have them. I wish my mom were alive. I remember coming home from school and finding my mother was in tears a lot. She was just depressed. And she was tearing Life magazine up. And she would show me a page, says, you see this man? This is what my father looked like a little bit. And she had nothing. And then, within 6 months of my finding out about Jewish Jen, I have already gathered pictures of 3 more of her siblings and her father. So the only thing I have of her mother is a signature. I found where the Jews of Lodz had to sign into the ghetto. So I took a picture of my grandmother's signature and I had it made into a necklace, but I don't have any pictures of her. But yeah, it would have been so meaningful if I just had it a little bit earlier, but we all feel that way, don't we? Yeah. Who else? Let me go back to, is Mike still on the line? Mike?
Yeah, Robin too is.
Yes, I am.
Okay, did I help you? Did you find some other resources there where a list might be found?
Well, I'm actually looking through now, and so far haven't found what I'm looking for, but I just started because I've been listening to you. Well, but thank you.
Sure, and that's a homework assignment. I expect you to have an answer for me within a month or two. And again, don't forget those Shoah testimonies.
Yeah.
People are speaking about those villages, and also look at Father Dubois' website. His group is called, I want to say Unum in something, and they're now mapping where the massacres took place. I might be able to find that for you, but I see Robin has a question as well.
Well, sort of a comment. I just wanted to thank you because not only was this so informative with such helpful tips, but it was so moving. It brought me to tears multiple times. I mean, it was truly a moving, unbelievable presentation. I guess personally, one of my own frustrations has been I don't have all the names to go on. It was my father's parents were in the US while their families all perished, because they came here in the early 20s and their families all perished. And we have so little. I have a few names, but very few. So it's been, it's been very frustrating when we don't even know the names to research, to know the stories.
Yeah, and I'm glad you at least recognize that there is a story, because I meet particularly American Jews who say, oh, we didn't lose anybody in the Holocaust. And my feeling is yet that you know of, because unless your family came over in the early 1800s, and even if they did, chances are somebody stayed behind and got swept up in that whirlwind. So yes, I understand what you're saying, because the first challenge for me was I did know some family names, but this was back again. I've been doing this since I was 10 years old, trying to help my mom, getting across the pond, finding out what are the repositories that even have the information. And then, not being able to write in that language. Thank goodness, that obstacle is over thanks to Jewishin and other websites. We now know the websites, but if we don't have the names or the towns, we're stymied. So, stay on this side of the ocean. See if you can find out what those names used to be by going up the family tree, going into the immigration sites, and then I can help you, or your members can help you go across the pond and see if we can figure out what happened to them. As you all know, having the town is really important, maybe even more important than the names in some cases, because you want to find out what.
I do have some things, and I do have a few people. And one thing I'm also hopeful now is, as some of the DNA data, I just went from Ancestry and uploaded my material to the MyHeritage. They had a free upload and whatever, and they have all the mapping, and then trying to figure out possible ancestors that may have, that connections through DNA to distant cousins, perhaps finding some that way.
Robin, that is another really good strategy. I'm not well versed in DNA, but I understand the power of it. And if I hadn't found my Swedish cousins on my own, doing it the old-fashioned way, one of my cousins took a DNA test and we matched up. So I knew I was on the right trail, but that's another back door. And let's face it, any door, any door will work.
It helps, because some of the same last names could have been, they're like Taub. There were loads of Taubs all over the place. So how do you know which ones you're really related to?
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. But those of us who have more common names to work with, my brother-in-law was a challenge, because Kramer is spelled so many different ways. It's a fairly common name throughout Eastern Europe. And again, I had pieces, but I couldn't connect them until I went to Gesher Galicia. Mark Halpern, I think a lot of you know Mark Halpern from Gesher Galicia, said there's stuff not on that website yet. Give me the names. And I found a record that tied all of the tree together. Turned out my brother-in-law, I guess everybody in this small town is related to one another, but he was related to Arthur Kurzweil. And I contacted Art, who's written a number of books about genealogy, and he didn't have some of the stuff I had. So it's when people say, oh, genealogy, that's a nice little hobby, I go, no, knitting's a hobby. This is an obsession. This is an obsession. Here's that website that I was mentioning for Mike. This is the Patrick Dubois website, the Holocaust by Bullets. And I'd encourage you to go there if the massacre sites were Poland or Ukraine, because again, they're mapping them. They are doing these incredible testimonies with the witnesses. One of the things that I find really annoying is when people say the survivors didn't talk. First of all, they were silenced. When they came here, my mother would have been happy to talk, and so would my father. But all the people here said, "Shah, that was in the past. You don't want to be a greener. You don't want to be a greenhorn here. Forget what happened to you in the past. So basically, shut up." And then, and then there were the ones who didn't talk. And then there were the ones who didn't talk until something like the Skokie incident happened. The Skokie incident happened, or Schindler's List came out. For my mother, the seminal moment was when the Nazis wanted to walk in her town, because she said people don't know what happened. It's not that they don't remember, they don't know. And so she became one of the Holocaust speakers, educators in Illinois. So try again. If you know of anybody, even secondhand like me, second generation, we don't know what we don't know, but we know a lot. So ask us.
Deborah,
Yes.
a question
Yes.
from Alex on chat for you.
This is a question from, you cut out, Jim.
Alex on chat.
Oh, yes, I see. I wonder if I had relatives lost. I know my mom's parents' names and villages near Minsk from which they immigrated. Okay, researcher told her all the inhabitants were murdered. Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay, so the first thing to do is, if you have the names, go to Yad Vashem and see if there are any pages of testimony for your relatives' names in Minsk. Minsk was a big city. It's like Chicago, you know, but see if anybody from, if you pair those two names, if that shows up. Also go to the, again, you want to apply to the Holocaust Museum and the ITS and see if they can find anything. You know, Russia is somewhat of a dark hole, isn't it? Those of you who've been searching your Russian ancestry know how difficult it is, but the Holocaust history there is actually rather well known. And I'd also suggest that you go into Google Books and see what you can find in the index of the books that have been written about Minsk. See if there's anything mentioned of that ancestral village. What was the name of those, of the towns and villages? Do you know, Alex?
Alex, you have to unmute yourself.
Or chat.
Yes, the two villages near there, about 20 miles away, were called Shmelovitz, Shmelovitzy, and Pakovitz, or Pakovitzy.
Okay.
And my daughter visited Minsk a couple of years ago and hired a researcher, but they said it's not even worth visiting because everything was destroyed and the people murdered. He was not able to find anything meaningful looking through the archives, the genealogical researcher who she hired there.
Well,
Yeah.
again, it can't hurt to look again, and you might want to start here. I typed in Google Books and it took me right here, and type in the names of those towns. I'm going to go, since I can't spell the names of those towns, I'm just going to go Minsk area Holocaust, and let's see if there's any mention. The Minsk ghetto. Okay, so here are several books that apparently mention Minsk. I would type in specifically, Alex, the names of those villages, but let me just show you how to use it. You go ahead and click on the link. Here's a cover of the book. And we can click on next and next and next. The words are highlighted, obviously, that we're looking for. And you can also go to the index at this point. Just go directly to the index and see if the towns are mentioned. If this book becomes interesting to you and you can't find it in your local library, then what you do is you go to worldcat.org. And when you get to WorldCat, you type in the name of the book you're looking for and your zip code, and it will tell you the closest location where you can find this book. Or of course you can just, you know, go to your local bookstore and buy it. So let's say you're looking for a rather obscure book. Or even a book that's not so obscure. And by the way, you can look for books and all kinds of other things like CDs. Here's the book. Click on it, and it will tell you where you can find it. Put in your zip code 27516, and it looks like the closest location I'd have to drive to get this book, 235 miles, is at the Holocaust Museum. It's also at the LA County Library, but you'll find something much closer to you because you live in a metropolitan area. So also just use plain old Google. There's no reason why you have to use Google Books. You might be able to find, I don't know if you've Googled the town itself to see if there's a Kahila page for it. Have you done that yet?
No, I have not done that.
Okay, so just start with Google, type in the name of the village, see what pops up, and then try the name of the village plus Kahila or Kahila link and see if a Jewish researcher has created a commemoration page like I did with Yezhov. Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Google, you know, one of the more famous genealogists refers to Google as Rabbi Google because this rabbi knows everything. Okay. I don't want to keep you folks beyond your endurance, but I'm happy to stay and answer any questions that you have. It's just good to look at you. It's nice to have company.
Yeah. Debbie, how long are you in Evanston?
Probably for a week and a half more. Then we go back down. My husband gets a second shot and then we come back up. We'll be back and forth a lot, Debbie. So
well, maybe we can meet sometime.
I would love that. We can reminisce.
I've already had my 2 shots. So
there's my email address for any of you who would like to get in touch with me. Pretty easy.
I was going to say that, Debbie, this is Howard. I want to thank you very much. And there's your email address. So if people want to contact you, I hope you'll be willing and able to respond to any questions that come in.
Sure. It's your obsession is my obsession.
Thank you again.
Thank you all. Chag Sameach. Happy Pesach, everybody.
Yeah. Debbie, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.